We are back again with On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're back at the UFC Apex for UFC Vegas 26. It's been a bit of a strange start to fight week as we have only just had the main event and the co-main event officially announced by the UFC. This weekend we have Marina Rodriguez headlining her first ever event as she fights Michelle Waterson. I don't mean any disrespect to this fight, but it's really hard not to be disappointed with this event as we were supposed to have got Corey Sandhagen versus the returning TJ Dillashaw as our 5-round main event. That fight has been rebooked, by the way, but this card would have been perfect for that fight. But anyway, there's a ton of really good fights on this card from a betting perspective and a fan perspective too. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there's a few things to mention in regards to MMA Play 365. The last event was amazing at MMA Play 365. The money back guarantee dog of the week was Philipe Colares and he won. There were 3 recommended bets with Giga Chikadze, Sean Strickland and Merab Dvalishvili, and they all won. 10 out of the 12 parlay options in the Fun Gamblers section won. 2 out of the 3 pre-made parlays won in the Fun Gamblers section too, and the 2 official bets were a Kamaru Usman and Merab Dvalishvili parlay and a straight play on Strickland after the Gabriel Benitez fight was scrapped. So all in all, you couldn't ask for much more. And finally, in case you missed it last week, just a quick announcement: Daily Fantasy Sports is back at MMA Play 365 and it starts this week as we are reopening that platform to help anybody who plays DraftKings and FanDuel. We have brought in a new DFS expert in DFS Sniper, so if you play DraftKings or FanDuel, make sure you grab your subscription this week. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website for all the UFC betting advice and DraftKings FanDuel advice you will ever need. We also have various subscription lengths and options too, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAplay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights. In the main event, we've got Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson. Rodriguez is currently the -200 favourite. The comeback on Waterson at +170 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do kind of think that the line's accurate. I think it's fair. Obviously, Michelle Waterson's got the name value, so when you see a +170 number next to her name, that's always appetising, but stylistically, I do think that this is going to be a tough fight for Waterson. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think there's going to be a little fluctuation from where we're at right now. I do think that we're going to see Rodriguez bets coming in. I think it might push it to -220, but I do still think that there's going to be money coming in on Waterson. Like I said, she's been in the UFC for years, she's a veteran, and she's only ever fought the best fighters in the division over a number of years, so I do think that we see some Waterson money coming in. Ultimately, when we step into the cage on Saturday night, I do expect the line to be sitting roughly where it is right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, like I say, I do think it's going to be a tough stylistic fight for Waterson. I think Waterson's got to get takedowns here. I do think she's got to take Rodriguez's back and potentially even find a submission along the way, because if she doesn't get takedowns, if she doesn't get that back take, and if she doesn't get that submission, it is just going to be a really long night for her. The biggest gap in skill in this fight is definitely on the feet. Rodriguez's Muay Thai is nasty. Her straight shots, her jab, her 1-2, her kicks down the middle, everything that she throws well comes straight down the middle. It's crisp, it's sharp, it's accurate. She can fight at range. When she gets in close into that boxing range, she'll close that distance a little bit further, clinch up with her opponents, get that Muay Thai plum clinch. She's got nasty knees, nasty elbows, and everything that she throws seems to come with pop. It comes with power, and she can finish her opponent. So on the feet, I think that Waterson is in a world of trouble here. However, like I've said, Waterson must get this fight to the mat, and actually this is where a lot of Rodriguez's opponents have had success against her, because you look at Amanda Ribas, she got her down once. You look at Carla Esparza, she got Rodriguez down 5 times. Calvillo got her down 3 times. Randa Marcos got her down twice. So this is something that can be done against Rodriguez, but Rodriguez doesn't panic when she's on her back. From time to time, she can settle a little bit too much on her back for my liking, but ultimately, she will be working, she will be throwing elbows off her back, and she will be trying to make her way back up to her feet. But for me, the bottom line here is I do believe that this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. You look at the takedown offense, the takedown accuracy of Michelle Waterson, that's at 34%. Then you look at the takedown defense of Marina Rodriguez, that's at 59%. So although I could see a takedown or two along the way, this is going to be 5 rounds or potentially 5 rounds. I could see this fight hitting the mat in moments, but I think the better work's going to be done on the feet. If Michelle Waterson does take Rodriguez down, she might ride her out for that round. I don't think she'll find a submission. I do think that, like I say, the better work will be done on the feet. I think that Rodriguez is the longer, taller, more dangerous and more skilled and varied striker in this fight. I think that she's going to land a lot of volume on the feet. I think she's going to hit Waterson with some hard shots as well. She might even get her out along the way, but if she doesn't, I do think that she looks better across 5 rounds if it goes to the judges' scorecards, and for that reason I'm picking Marina Rodriguez to win this fight. And in the next fight in the co-main event, we should have had Donald Cerrone versus Diego Sanchez. Sanchez has pulled out and has been cut by the UFC. Alex Morono steps in. So we've got Donald Cowboy Cerrone versus Alex Morono. Cerrone is currently the -140 favourite. The comeback on Morono at +120 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I think the value sits with the favourite in Donald Cerrone at -140. It has fluctuated since the betting line opened last night. Cerrone was down as low as -120. He was also as high as -160, I believe. So it has been fluctuating a bit. Ultimately, I think at -140 the value does lie with the favourite. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, again I think the fluctuation continues. I think that we are going to see Cerrone up at -160, -165, but I do think that people will bet Morono in this spot. He's tough, he's got volume, and Cerrone isn't getting any younger, so I do think we see bets coming in on Morono. Ultimately, when they step into the cage on Saturday night, I do expect Cerrone to be around that -150 mark with the comeback on Morono at roughly around +130, +135. As for how this fight plays out though, this fight reminds me a lot of Alex Morono's fight with Anthony Pettis. I do think that a lot of things tie up with the same. I think Donald Cerrone is that aging vet, just like Pettis was that aging vet. Anthony Pettis wasn't on good form going into that fight. Neither is Donald Cerrone here as well. But ultimately, I just think that even though Cerrone is, like I said, an aging vet, he's not getting any younger. He's definitely past his prime. His best years are behind him. I still think that he's got enough in the tank to compete at a certain level in the UFC. And I think Morono fits that bill of the certain level. If you're talking the level at the top of the division, then absolutely not. Cerrone will get smoked by every guy at the top of the division. But I think here with Alex Morono, I don't think, although I like Morono a lot as a fighter, he's fun. I like to watch him. He's dangerous. He comes forward. He can eat a shot. He will constantly be in your face throughout 15 minutes or throughout as long as the fight lasts. I just think that he's a little step behind when it comes to his skill set, his abilities inside the cage. I think Cerrone's just still that level above him. I think Cerrone's got better striking. I think his wrestling's better. I think his grappling's better offensively and defensively as well. So even if Morono does shoot a takedown, Cerrone's on his back. I do think that Cerrone is liable to hit a triangle or an armbar or to sweep him and get on top himself. Although you can make an argument that Morono is live in this fight because, like I said, Cerrone, he's not as durable as what he used to be. He isn't the fighter that he used to be either. So if Morono really does put it on him, he could land a really hard punch that puts Cerrone out of there. But I tend to think that going 3 rounds with someone like Nico Price, who is more dangerous, powerful and aggressive than Morono, if you're going through 3 rounds with Nico Price without getting knocked out, then I think it's possible you can do that with Alex Morono without getting knocked out. But ultimately, I do think that Morono is going to need that knockout to win this fight because I don't think Cerrone's cardio is bad, so I don't think he's going to fade throughout the fight. I think the volume could potentially be close, but I think Cerrone will control the distance better. I think he'll land the better strikes throughout the 15 minutes as well. And although, again, there could be some wrestling and grappling exchanges, but I do expect this fight to be won and lost on the feet. So I definitely think that Cerrone is going to put in the better body of work. If he doesn't get knocked out, he should win this fight. I'm not sure if he finishes Morono, but I do think that Morono needs the finish to win this fight against Cowboy Cerrone. I think Cerrone may drop around throughout 3 rounds if it does go to a decision, but ultimately I don't see Cerrone dropping 2 rounds in this fight. I don't think Morono finds the finish he needs. I'm picking Donald Cerrone to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Neal Magny versus Geoff Neal. This should be a fun one. Geoff Neal is currently the -185 favourite. The comeback on Magny at +160 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Neal Magny. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think Geoff Neal should be a -185 favourite against someone like Neal Magny. Of course, I understand why Geoff Neal is the favourite, by the way, but at -185, I do think it's too wide, and Magny's proven in previous fights that if you put that plus number ahead of him around that plus 160, plus 170 mark, he will perform for you. So yeah, I think the value's on the underdog in Neal Magny. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think it will naturally close up. To be honest, I would be surprised if Geoff Neal went to minus 200, minus 210 or north of that. I do think the line will close up throughout fight week, and I would expect Geoff Neal to come into the cage on Saturday night minus 165, minus 170. I don't think it goes much lower than that. I do think that there is a reason why Neal is the favourite. I just don't think he should be this big of a favourite, that's all. So as for how this fight plays out, ultimately I think this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. I think that if anybody's going to start shooting for takedowns, it's Magny. He could potentially get takedowns as well, and if he does, he might have some success topside, but I do see the majority of the better work being played out on the feet in this fight, even though, like I say, Magny would be the one to mix things up if a fighter in that cage in this fight was going to mix it up. And then you look at how they're going to match up physically and stylistically. Well, physically, Magny is going to have a 4-inch height advantage, a 5-inch reach advantage. He's going to want to stay on the outside, whereas Geoff Neal is a little bit shorter, but he's more powerful, he's more explosive, especially inside boxing range. So he's definitely going to be wanting to close the distance on Magny, get inside, let rip with some shots and look to knock him out. Now, previously, Magny has shown a weakness for fighters that like to fight with that sort of style. Fighters that will come forward, that will push through the barrier, that will eat a couple of Magny's shots to land their own shots, combinations inside the pocket. The Santiago Ponzinibbio fight is a really good example of that. So Geoff Neal fits the bill of that type of fighter that can walk Magny down, that can land a lot of hard shots and potentially knock him out. But I also think that Geoff Neal is going to have problems at the same time in doing that, because Magny's distance management is really good. He can fight well defensively, fight on the back foot, just stick that long jab out, the straight 1-2, use that reach advantage that he'll have over pretty much every opponent. But when things do get a little bit hairy for Magny, he'll close the distance even further to avoid that boxing range. He'll clinch up with his opponents, and from then he can turn his opponents against the cage. He's deceptively strong. I know he looks tall and long, and it will look like Geoff Neal is the stronger fighter to the eye, but I do think that, like I said, Magny is deceptively strong. I don't think he's going to be totally outmatched in the clinch, and he's got good trips and good takedowns. He's got good wrestling. I think if he can put Geoff Neal on his back, it will make Geoff Neal a little bit hesitant to throw strikes on the feet. As long as Magny can put him on his back relatively easily and relatively frequently, I think that'll open the striking up a little bit for Magny as well. I do think that Neal Magny's got a really good chance of winning this fight. I'm a big Geoff Neal fan. I have been for years. When he first came into the UFC, I loved his style, and he's done great things, and I respect what he does in regards to his working life and his UFC life as well. He's a really good fighter, and he's an intelligent fighter as well, but I'm just yet to see Geoff Neal have too much success in a fight at this level, and I don't think that Magny's a championship contender. I don't think he's a fighter that will ever be in the mix, but Magny's a veteran and a fighter that's been around for years, and a fighter that's fought pretty much every decent fighter in the division throughout those years as well. I just don't think that this is going to be an easy fight for Geoff Neal. Stylistically, he definitely has advantages in this fight, and he definitely has ways to win the fight for sure. There's a reason why he's a favourite in this fight, but also Neal Magny has a stylistic advantage. He has physical advantages, and I think he's got a couple of paths to victory here. He could stick on the outside and just pop away at Geoff Neal, frustrate him, a little bit like what Wonderboy did, but definitely not on that level. Or Magny could close the distance and try and take Neal down, try and get relentless with the wrestling, and try and win that way. So I think that Magny's got a couple of paths to victory. The fact that he's a plus 160 favourite, it does lean me to be picking the underdog in this fight. So for that reason, I'm picking Neal Magny to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Maurice Greene versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. De Lima is currently the minus 190 favourite. They come back on Greene at plus 165 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I don't see a great value, if I'm being honest. If you are going to push me for a value side at minus 190, I would say that De Lima is a better bet than Maurice Greene at plus 165. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, the trend so far since this betting line got released is the money on De Lima. He was around minus 160, minus 170 last week, so a lot of money's coming on him, and I do agree with that trend as well. I do think it continues. I think Lima will get into the cage at around -210, -220 on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out though, I do think stylistically De Lima is going to have advantages in this fight. De Lima's actually a really good fighter. He's just got one glaring hole in his game, and that's his takedown defense and being controlled with his back on the mat. Now, Maurice Greene, even though predominantly is a striker, he does have decent grappling. He was surviving against Alexei Oleinik, which at this point, if you can survive on your back with someone like Alexei Oleinik on top of you, that's a pretty good standard to set. But the problem is with Greene is his wrestling doesn't look to be amazing. He doesn't shoot takedowns. He's never scored a takedown in the UFC, so you have to believe that this fight is going to take place on the feet. It wouldn't shock me too much if Greene started shooting takedowns, just because of that hole in De Lima's game is absolutely glaring. And if Greene can get on top of De Lima, I definitely think that he could go to work there topside. I think his grappling's good enough, but ultimately I do think he's going to stand and strike with De Lima. It's De Lima who could potentially mix things up, because for as bad as he is defensively in his jiu-jitsu on his back, De Lima actually has decent offensive wrestling and decent topside control as well. He took Adam Visharek down 3 times. After he dropped Stefan Struve in round 1 in their fight, he was able to get on top of Struve and establish a good top position, ride that round out as well. So it wouldn't shock me if he was to take Greene down, but again, Greene's grappling is decent enough that I'm not sure if De Lima could hold him down. This is why I think the fight's won and lost on the feet, because there are multiple angles of different elements of martial arts to be played into this fight, like I say, with the wrestling, with the grappling, but I just think the better qualities of this fight with these two fighters is going to happen on the feet in the striking department, and that's where I really like De Lima here. De Lima's got that Muay Thai background. He is going to give up some size, some height, some reach here to Maurice Greene, so he's got to make sure he can get into range, close the distance and land on Greene. But De Lima has got ways that he can close that distance. He's got a really hard low kick. He could definitely land that to Greene, halt the movement a little bit, and that will allow him to be the more aggressive mover in the fight. It'll allow him to close the distance, and from there he can start ripping shots, throwing hard punches at the chin of Greene. And the combinations and the power that De Lima throws with is absolutely nasty. If he closes the distance and gets a hold of you, the dude is physically strong as well. I know fighters that have trained with De Lima, and they say the same thing, that he's just a big, strong monster and he's really difficult to deal with from a physical standpoint. So I think there's a lot of advantages for De Lima here. I think he's the better technical striker. I think he throws with more power, and I think if this fight closes the distance throughout boxing range into the clinch positions, I think that De Lima's going to be the more physical fighter there as well. I think De Lima's got the more likelihood of mixing things up with the wrestling and grappling as well, should that happen. So when you start tying everything together, it does look like De Lima has a lot of advantages in this fight, and it's for that reason I'm picking Marcos Rogerio De Lima to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is my fight of the night. We've got Diego Ferreira versus Gregor Gillespie. Gillespie's currently the -175 favourite. The comeback on Ferreira at +155 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think slight value sits with Gregor Gillespie at -175. There is an argument that he could be closer to -200, but at -200 you're very close to the value flipping over to Diego Ferreira. So at -175, I think that Gillespie is that value side. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think we're going to see some fluctuation. We have been since this betting line got released. There's people that like the underdog in Diego Ferreira. Stylistically, he does have some advantages, so I understand the Ferreira bets coming in, but I also will always understand the Gregor Gillespie bets coming in as well, with him being that beast wrestler that he is. So there's going to be some fluctuation. Ultimately, I think they're going to step into the cage roughly where they're at right about now on that betting line. As for how this fight plays out though, it's quite an easy fight to read in my opinion. You've got Gregor Gillespie that's going to go in there. He's going to try and look to take Ferreira down, but he's got to do it safely. Now, watching the takedowns of Gillespie, he loves shooting in on that single leg, and if he doesn't get the single leg, he'll chain wrestle with double legs. But one thing that I noticed is his head predominantly is always on the inside, so he doesn't leave it exposed to be choked. Now, every now and again, he can be a little bit lazy with that, and that's where he's got to be careful. There's been positions where fighters have stuffed a takedown and they've got that front choke position on Gillespie. They've just not been able to do anything with it. Now with Diego Ferreira, that's different. If he gets that front choke position, he's going to be able to do something with it. So this is what I mean with Gillespie's got to shoot carefully, but he definitely minds his P's and Q's. Like I say, the majority of the time the head's on the inside, it's safe, he'll get takedowns. But one thing that I love about Gillespie is he never shoots takedowns and ends up in full guard. He'll shoot a takedown, it might cause a bit of a scramble, he'll throw the legs of his opponents out to the side and he'll either end up in side control or half guard. And that's really important here from Gillespie getting submitted with Ferreira off his back, because if he ends up in guard, in full guard, then Ferreira's got the options of throwing a triangle up, an armbar up. I suppose when you think about it, Ferreira's got advantages with the sweeps in the half guard and side control positions, but the thing is with Gregor Gillespie is very heavy and very strong on top, and he's a really good wrestler. So I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for Ferreira, even though he's a world-class, legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for him to sweep Gregor Gillespie, with a half guard sweep, or from side control, scooting the hips out and reversing the position, but I do think there's a possibility of it. I just don't think it's very likely. Now, when you look at the striking of both fighters, you see Gregor Gillespie making improvements, even against Kevin Lee. I know he got knocked out, but he was actually getting the better of the striking exchanges in that fight. He was very tight, he was very clean and crisp, and he actually might have been a good striker all this time. We just never see it because he shoots him for takedowns. Now, against Kevin Lee, it wasn't as easy as just shooting him for takedowns and working Lee with wrestling, because Lee was a good wrestler himself, so that allowed us to see some of the striking of Gillespie, and it is nice, it is tight, and so's the striking of Ferreira as well. That's an element in his game that's improved over the years. He was always that legitimate grappler, but he's put his striking together really nicely, and I think from a striking perspective, I don't really see an edge in this fight. I think that the striking will be very even for as long as it's on the feet. Now, with the scoring criteria of effective striking and effective grappling, I don't think, as I've just mentioned, there's going to be an edge on the feet, so I do think it's going to play into the wrestling and the grappling. I think that's where this fight is going to be won and lost. We saw with Beneil Dariush, when he fought Ferreira in Ferreira's last fight, Dariush was able to score takedowns, he was able to remain safe. Now, granted, the jiu-jitsu of Beneil Dariush is legit as well, and it's better than Gillespie's, but Gillespie is a better wrestler, he's heavier on top as well, and he's got a better level of control when he's on top of his opponents, and he's also got a good grappling game, plenty of submission wins himself. I think this fight's won and lost in the wrestling and grappling department. I think if Ferreira can't submit Gillespie off his back, then he is going to lose this fight. I don't think the sweeps and reversals is going to be easy against a good top heavy wrestler like Gillespie. So as I've just mentioned, I do get the feeling that the biggest path to victory for Diego Ferreira would be to submit Gillespie off his back. At this level in the UFC, it's not a path to victory that I like to rely on. I don't like to rely on a fighter needing a submission off the back, and for that reason, I'm going to pick Gregor Gillespie to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Amanda Ribas versus Angela Hill. Ribas is currently the -175 favourite. They come back on Hill at +155 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Angela Hill. And again, I completely understand why Ribas is the favourite. I just think the betting line's a little bit too wide. I know Amanda Ribas is, or was, the darling of the division. Without that last loss in her last fight, should be a bigger favourite in this spot. But I just feel that the betting line should be closer, and for that reason, I think that Angela Hill is the value side. And as for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, the current trend is the money on Amanda Ribas, and I do think this continues to happen. I think that when both of these fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I think we will see Ribas at around -200 with Angela Hill at around +165, +170. As for how this fight plays out though, I don't think it's going to be an absolute whitewash from Ribas. I do definitely think that Angela Hill has got ways to win this fight. I think that it's going to be really interesting seeing Ribas coming off a loss as well. What does that look like mentally for her? When you look at the styles of both fighters, I think that Ribas is going to need takedowns in this fight. Ribas' striking isn't bad, but Angela Hill's Muay Thai, her movement and her volume is really good, and like I said, her volume's really high as well. So the speed that she brings into the cage with her movement, with her strikes, I think is going to cause Ribas a lot of problems, to the point where Ribas is going to need takedowns, and it's in those types of fights, although Angela Hill can be taken down, that Hill does thrive in when she knows her opponent is going to take a shot and try and take her down. And even if Ribas does take Hill down, I don't think she's going to completely roll on her on the mat. Angela Hill can be put on her back, she can lay a little bit settled for too long, but she also can get back up to her feet, and she's also got submissions herself off her back. You saw her trying to put Yan Xiaonan in a triangle a couple of years ago when Xiaonan took her down. So she's got abilities to fight off her back, she's got abilities to get up off her back. She just can run the clock down a little bit too long with herself on her back, and that's a bit of a problem because when you're running that clock down on your back, you're ultimately losing minutes in that round and potentially that round as well. But aside from that, I think that Hill is going to be okay in this fight. I don't think Ribas is going to be able to run through her like she did around Marcos, for example. I think Hill's striking is going to hold up. I think she actually has the advantage in the striking department as well, and Ribas has got to be the one that mixes things up. But just like I said with the Geoff Neal and Neal Magny fight, the plus 155 on Angela Hill is too big of a number in this spot with this stylistic matchup with how both of these fighters match up against each other. So I am again going to pick the underdog at plus 155. I'm picking Angela Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ben Rothwell versus Philipe Lins. Rothwell is currently the minus 115 slight favourite with the slight underdog, Philipe Lins, at minus 105. As for where the value is on this betting line, the betting line is really close. It's almost a pick'em. So if you've got a good read, then either side is bettable in this spot. As I said, as long as you have that good read. As for where the betting lines move throughout fight week, honestly, up to this point, this betting line has hardly moved. We have seen Philipe Lins at minus 115 and that line flipped to Rothwell becoming minus 115, but this is a really minor line flip. It's not as if one fighter was sat at a plus 150 underdog and is now sitting as a minus 130 favourite, so it can happen. I don't expect much money to come in on this fight, to be honest, in order to push one of these fighters out to minus 130, minus 140 or north of that. I do think the betting line is going to be sitting roughly where we're at right about now. It wouldn't shock me to see Philipe Lins take that minus 115 at some point, but ultimately when both of these fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I think they're going to be at a dead even minus 110 pick'em. As for how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be one that's won and lost on the feet. If any one of these fighters did decide to level change and take their opponent down, I do think that that is more likely to be Philipe Lins, but I think if he does that, he runs the risk of getting choked out by Ben Rothwell, so I'm not sure that's a great idea, and if he did that, I do think that Rothwell could potentially find a submission on the way down to the mat. But as I said, I don't expect too many takedowns, and if there is a takedown, I'm not sure it's going to be completed. I think the better work's going to be done on the feet, and I do think that that better work is probably going to come from Ben Rothwell. This is going to be a close fight. It wouldn't surprise me if the rounds were that close that we got to a decision and we weren't sure who's taken the fight. I think Ben Rothwell is going to be better early on in this fight. I think Lins, should he survive the onslaught, weather the storm that Rothwell will bring in that round one, if he should survive that, then I think Lins will probably finish the round better. If it does go to a decision and we've got Rothwell winning round one, Lins winning round three, and then the passing of the torch throughout round two, again, it's just going to make the fight really close. I just think that I've been very underwhelmed with Philipe Lins. I have given him the benefit of the doubt in his UFC fights so far from what I saw in his PFL days. He's just not transferred over to the UFC how he left in the PFL. I think Rothwell has been in there with the best fighters in the division at the top of the game for a very long time. I think he's going to land the slightly more volume. I think he's going to land powerful shots as well. It's the powerful shots that the judges seem to really like, but if you add volume in that mix as well, I do think that Rothwell is able to knock Lins out. I also think Rothwell's able to win 2 out of the 3 rounds. I think it would be the opening 2 rounds, but 2 rounds nonetheless. He's durable. I don't see him getting finished. I think that Ben Rothwell is the more likely fighter to finish. I think he's the more likely fighter to edge it out on the scorecards as well. For that reason, I'm picking Ben Rothwell to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Phil Hawes versus Kyle Daukaus. Daukaus is currently the minus 140 favourite to come back on Hawes at plus 120 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think there's slight value with Kyle Daukaus. Before I looked into this fight, before I watched the tape, I was very surprised that Daukaus was a favourite. I do think Hawes probably should have been in that spot, but after watching tape, I do understand it stylistically. I think that Daukaus is going to have advantages, so I think the value lies with Kyle Daukaus right there. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I expect fluctuation though, because I do think people like Phil Hawes. He's a boxer, wrestler with big power, good takedowns, and people like that type of fighter, physical specimen as well. So I expect money to come in on Hawes. I do think the line's going to fluctuate. Ultimately, I don't think it fluctuates too much to really impact where the betting lines are sitting right about now. So come Saturday night, I do think Daukaus is going to be around that minus 135, minus 140 mark, with Hawes at around plus 115, plus 120 where he is now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, we all know Hawes is going to be super dangerous in round one. He's going to be full of energy. He's fast, his speed on the feet is crazy, his movement's good as well. And also in that first round, he's explosive, he's got power in his hands, he's got explosive takedowns, he can take you down. He's a former D1 wrestler, and like I say, a former D1 wrestler with big power in your hands is always a dangerous fighter. I also love the addition of his low kick in his last fight as well. The difference is with Daukaus, I don't think that weapon's going to be available because Daukaus is a southpaw, so that low kick from Hawes out of the orthodox stance, it's just a weapon that's not going to be there for him in this fight. But still, regardless, I think Hawes in round one is going to be super dangerous. But this is the problem that I have with Hawes, because if he doesn't get that finish in round one, then he's going to struggle down the stretch. He does have cardio issues. Now again, in his last fight against Imavov, the cardio issues weren't as apparent, but the fight wasn't as fast paced either. There was a lot of clinch work, which I know can drain you and take the cardio out of you and things like that, but Hawes is a former D1 wrestler, so Hawes isn't going to get as tired when he's working hard in the clinch. And also, he was dominating those clinch positions, so again, he wasn't expending a lot of energy. But I do think that this fight's going to be different, because if he does try and tie up with Kyle Daukaus is a big middleweight. He's not only tall, but he's really thick and stocky as well, which is unusual to see. It's actually really interesting of how he even makes 185, but that's a different conversation. If he does tie up with Kyle Daukaus for me is deceptively strong. I don't think he's going to have it as easy as what he had it against Imavov. And if he takes Daukaus down, he's going to be going to the ground with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a fighter that is more comfortable on the ground. And on the mat, Daukaus is good both offensively and defensively. We saw Brendan Allen on top of Daukaus, and Daukaus looked absolutely fine, and he was sweeping and reversing somebody like Brendan Allen, who is also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So I think if Hawes does take Daukaus down, that's going to be a bad game plan. I don't think he wants to go to the mat with Daukaus. He'll be able to take him down with the wrestling for sure, but Daukaus has a really good jiu-jitsu game, and I think he would be able to find the sweeps and reversals to put himself on top in those advantageous positions. And listen, if Daukaus gets on top of Hawes in this fight, then Hawes is in a world of trouble. That is the last place that he needs to be in this fight. He would rather, or he should rather, be happier on the feet, gassed, getting litten up, opposed to being on the ground on your back with Daukaus on top of you, because Daukaus has got a good level of control. He knows what he's doing. He's got good ground and pound. He's got good submissions. He can ride around out, and he can drain your cardio whilst he's on top of you as well. At this level, with someone like Hawes underneath him, I think he'd have a field of a time. But then we go to the striking. Like I say, I think Hawes is very dangerous in round one, but I also think that with the way this fight's going to play out, his cardio is going to be tested more than it was in his last fight. I do expect after round one, Hawes to start slowing down a little bit. Maybe not so much in the early stages of round two, but definitely throughout the latter stages of round two and round three, should it go there. And from there, I think Daukaus will be able to take over. Also, the durability of Hawes was a big concern as well in his last fight against Imavov. Imavov was hitting him with shots that I don't think looked like they had a ton of power behind them anyway, but he was still stunning Hawes every single time he hit him. Stores was wobbling, he was all over the place. He was then looking to clinch up and looking to try and get the fight down to the mat, which we've already been over in this fight. So when you really start to put everything together, you do start to understand why Daukaus is the favourite in this fight. But make no mistake about it, it could be a better live betting opportunity. If this fight goes out of round one, then Daukaus will be live for sure, because Hawes is extremely dangerous in round one. And if he comes out there and sparks Kyle Daukaus out in round one, knocks him unconscious, gets the knockout, I ain't going to be surprised. But I do always favour the fighter that has just got to weather that storm, get past the early stages, and then look to take over the fight late. They're the type of fighters that I tend to side with more often than not, and for that reason, I'm picking Kyle Daukaus to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a good one. We've got the return of Michael Trizano versus Ludovit Klein. Klein is currently the minus 250 favourite. The comeback on Trizano at plus 210 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value absolutely sits with Trizano at plus 210. I think that the betting line is way too wide here. I do understand why Klein is the favourite, but I've got a really strong opinion and strong thoughts on how wide this betting line is, because it is disgustingly wide. Now you look at Klein's debut in the UFC against Shane Young. Klein opened as a plus money underdog. The public bet him into a pick'em, and then they bet him into a slight favourite, and then they bet him into a moderate favourite. Klein went out there, he head kicked Young, sparked him out in round 1, made the bookies look stupid for opening Klein at plus money. There was a lot of bets on Klein as well, so the bookies made a big mistake. So then they come into this fight here against Trizano, and they're definitely overcompensating for what happened last time and for how wrong they were last time, and therefore set the line at minus 250, and the public are seeing that as well. The public are agreeing with the betting line, and that's why there's not a lot of line closure here. And what this is just recency bias on the betting line. If you look at Shane Young, in my opinion, I've never been high on Shane Young, so I'm not surprised Klein went out there and beat him. If you think that Trizano would fight Klein on his UFC debut, the fact that the bookies opened Shane Young as the favourite in that fight, if that was Trizano instead of Shane Young fighting Klein on his debut, then Trizano probably would have been a minus 150, minus 160 favourite in this spot, opposed to being a plus 210 underdog. Like I said, it's recency bias on the line. The bookies are overcompensating for errors and mistakes that they made in Ludovit Klein's debut. But the one thing just to keep in mind is the betting line isn't going to affect the fight and how this plays out. I'm just explaining why the line is so wide. And with that said, we move on to where the betting line moves throughout fight week. The current trend is the money coming in on Klein. People are still liking Klein at minus 250. I assume that he's going to be played straight. I assume that he's going to be in parlays as well. Again, people love that round 1 knockout, but I do think that at some point it hits a brick wall and money will start to come back in on Trizano. Ultimately, when they step into the cage on Saturday night, I expect the betting lines to be roughly where they're sitting right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be a fight that is won and lost on the feet. I think predominantly it's going to take place in the striking department. If any fighter is going to mix things up inside the cage, it is probably more likely to be Trizano going to his wrestling and trying to take Klein down. I'd be shocked to see Klein shoot for takedowns in this fight. Klein's the type of guy that I've seen drop his opponent and be a little bit hesitant to get in the guard. Because of that, letting them back up and trying to knock them down again until they're more hurt and then get into the guard for ground and pound. So because of that, I do have a hard time believing Klein will even think about a takedown in this fight. Ultimately, though, Trizano's a striker. He's a dangerous striker, and I do think that he will accept a back and forth war with Klein. Trizano's got to be careful of that left head kick coming from Klein, though, because Klein's left head kick is an absolute weapon. He does set it up with his hands as well. He doesn't really throw it blind. The problem that I've got with that, though, obviously it's a great thing to set your kicks up with punches or vice versa, set your punches up by using kicks, really mixing things up. But Klein tends to use the same combinations over and over. It's the jab, it's the 1-2 from the southpaw position, and then it's the 1-2 step into the head kick. So for me, it's not that hard to read what's going to come from Klein. The reason Klein's so successful with it is because it's just super fast. He's rapid, he's got good speed. But someone like Trizano, I think, should be able to make the reads and see that coming. I think that with Trizano training with Tiger Schulmans, he's got guys like Jimmy Rivera, Shane Burgos, Lyman Good, Julio Arce. He's got fighters in that gym that can prepare him really well for somebody like Klein. Now, Klein has got the opportunity to knock Trizano out here, even if it's not just kicking to the head. He's got to go to the legs and to the body, and if he really starts mixing things up, then he's going to give himself a really good chance of winning this fight. But I also think that he has to mix things up because Trizano's a good striker. Like I said, with this betting line, it's making it look like Trizano just shouldn't be in there with Klein, and honestly, that's not the case. I think the line should be much closer to a pick'em, in my opinion. I think Trizano is going to give Klein a fight here. He's taller, he's longer, he's very technically sound as well. I don't think that Trizano has as much power in his strikes as what Klein has. I think Klein is definitely the more powerful fighter, the more aggressive fighter, the more explosive fighter. But from a technical perspective, Trizano is a very good fighter. He's going to be very well prepared with the camp that he's been in, with the training partners that he has around him. I think he's sparring on a day-to-day basis with fighters that are better than Ludovit Klein. I think that Trizano could beat Klein on the feet. I also think he could mix things up with the wrestling and grappling. I think that's an underrated aspect of his game, just like it is with a lot of those other fighters. Again, Burgos has got an underrated game, so is Rivera, so is Good, so is Arce. They're all really well rounded. So I do think that Trizano's got more paths to victory here. I do think that on the feet it could be quite close, especially with the speed, explosivity and power of Klein, but I do think that that's something that Trizano could weather in this fight, especially early on, and just pick away at Klein. So I think that Trizano's got multiple ways to win this fight. I do think he's a good fighter. The one thing that is a little bit of a concern from Trizano is the fact that he has been out for a couple of years. He has had surgery on his knee, he's injured his ankle, he had COVID as well. There was cancelled fights that he had to work through, so from a mental perspective there's a few things going on in the background outside of the fighting inside the cage world, so to speak, that Trizano has been dealing with, so that has to be a concern from Trizano's side. But ultimately, just like I've done with Neal Magny, just like I've done with Angela Hill, the line's too wide. I am going to be picking the underdog in this fight. I'm picking Michael Trizano to win this fight. And in the next fight, we should have a fun, fast, explosive fight here. We've got Ryan Benoit versus Zarrukh Adashev. Benoit is currently the -140 favourite. The comeback on Adashev at +120 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, again, I think the value's with the underdog in Adashev at +120. I honestly think that this fight could be really close. I think it should be a -110 pick'em on either side. So if Benoit was the +120 underdog in this spot, I'd be saying the value is on him as well. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think there's going to be some fluctuation, but ultimately it hasn't moved too much in the last few days, which does make me believe that the betting line has probably settled for the duration. So come fight night on Saturday night, I don't expect the betting lines to have drifted too much from where they're sitting right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, it's a really interesting fight, and I think one reason that Benoit is the favourite in this fight is because I do think he's the more likely fighter to mix things up inside the cage. Predominantly, I think this fight is going to take place on the feet. They're both strikers, they've both got good movement, they've both got really fast hands, they mix in kicks with the combinations as well. So this is what I was saying about it being a fun, fast, explosive fight. I think in regards to power, Benoit also has the power advantage, so again, that's probably the reason why he's edging as the moderate favourite on the betting line. But Adashev had some really good moments in his last fight against Sumudaerji, in a fight where he was undersized, his skill level was obviously not at that level of Sumudaerji right now, and Adashev got that fight brought to him heavy early on. He was rocked, he was knocked down, Sumudaerji was teeing off on him, but Adashev found a way to get himself back up, figure out Sumudaerji, make the correct in-cage adjustments and start to really put it on him, and it was really impressive to see that. Ultimately, Adashev just didn't do enough to get the win on the night, but he made it much closer than what it should have been watching those early moments in that fight. Against Benoit, I don't think Benoit's as technical as Sumudaerji. He's definitely not got the height and the reach of Sumudaerji or the movement either. He is a slightly different fighter though. Like I say, Benoit's got a wrestling background, so this is the reason why Benoit is the more likely fighter to mix things up if things get a little bit too heated. I do think that he could probably level change, shoot a takedown on Adashev, but the reason why I don't think the fight's won and lost there is because Adashev's got a good scrambling game himself. I don't think that Benoit will be able to just lie on top of him, run the clock down, or really go to work in regards to the grappling, ground and pound and submission attempts. I don't think that happens, and when they're back on the feet, Adashev has been knocked out and has been stung and dropped in both of his UFC fights. Benoit does carry that power in his hands. I think Benoit's the more likely fighter to find a finish. Because of that, I think he's the more likely fighter to win a decision as well with the volume, and obviously if he does knock Adashev down in a round, he's going to win that round on the scorecards regardless of what else happens in that round. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ryan Benoit to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tafon Dadon Nchukwi versus the Iron Turtle Jun Yong Park. Nchukwi is currently the -140 favourite. The comeback on Park at +120 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value is with the favourite in Nchukwi. It wasn't last week. Nchukwi was a much bigger favourite, up at -160, -165. A lot of money's come back in on Park, and I understand that line movement, but right now the value's flipped over to Nchukwi at this point at -140. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, at this point this looks like it's the settled betting line, so I do see some slight fluctuation. It wouldn't shock me to see Nchukwi go back up to -150, -155, but again at that point there's going to be money coming back in on Park. So ultimately, come fight night on Saturday night, I expect the betting lines to be quite similar to where they're sitting right about now. As for how the fight plays out, I think that Park is going to need takedowns in this fight. He loves his wrestling. He seems to have this newfound love for wrestling, and he has been putting in the work in that wrestling department as well, which is great for him because he was never a bad striker either. He always had decent speed, he's got decent accuracy, he doesn't really waste strikes, and now he's added wrestling to his game as well. He's just elevating himself, and it's really good to see. But against Nchukwi, I think it's going to be really difficult. Listen, first and foremost, I have got no idea how Nchukwi manages to make that 185-pound limit, because that dude is huge. And the most impressive thing about it, I think everybody was thinking the same thing when they saw him walk out in his UFC debut and they saw the size of him. They thought, oh my God, this guy's probably going to have a minute, maybe 2 minutes worth of gas, and then that's it. He's going to be done for the rest of the fight, which is also the type of fighter that you always want to try and fade. But Nchukwi came in there with a decent pace, decent pressure. He put on a really good performance, and he just didn't look like he was slowing down at all. Just phenomenal to see, you know, absolute physical specimen. But like I said, I've just touched upon it there. Nchukwi, predominantly a striker. He's got good power. He's got combinations. He'll rip to the body. He'll rip to the head. He'll throw kicks off combinations as well. If it gets into clinch positions, he's just so big and so physical, and he's strong. He'll be able to bully his opponents in the clinch. He's difficult to throw about, therefore he's difficult to take down. He's just a really good fighter. I heard a lot of people saying after his fight with Jamie Pickett that they can't wait to fade him moving forward. I've got no idea why you'd want to fade a fighter like that. You know, obviously he's not a perfect fighter. He is still relatively green in regards to his technique and things like that, but he looks like he's got everything laid out for him. He's got a path, he's on a journey, and he's got everything he needs to be to become a good fighter. So I like Nchukwi. I think that Jung Yong Park is definitely going to need takedowns here, and he could potentially get those takedowns as well. I'm not saying he can't, but it's going to be difficult because of the physicality of Nchukwi. I think when Park comes into range, he's going to get hit by hard combinations from the hands, from the kicks, and that might be enough to deter the wrestling game of Park moving forwards. But if Park does shoot a takedown, we have seen Nchukwi taken down, we have seen him get back up to his feet. But interestingly, Nchukwi has experience in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments with the IBJJF, so he's not a slouch on the mat either. He's clearly training in a gi. That was at blue belt level, by the way, so admittedly, you know, he is at the start of his Brazilian jiu-jitsu journey, but the fact that he's in a gi and he's rolling week in, week out, it's a good sign for him. I think that Jung Yong Park is a good fighter. I think he's going to have his moments in this fight, but ultimately I just don't think he's going to be able to do enough to steal a win from Nchukwi. Even if he takes 1 round, I'm not convinced Park takes 2 rounds, so for that reason I'm picking Tafon Dadon Nchukwi to win this fight. And in the final fight of this breakdown, we've got Christian Aguilera versus the newcomer Carlston Harris. Harris is currently the -150 favourite. The comeback on Aguilera at +130 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I think the betting line is about right with Harris at -150. I do understand it. And if you are going to squeeze me for a value side, I would say the value slightly sits with Harris at -150. But with that being said, I also think there's an argument that Aguilera is live at +130 as well. But as for where this betting line moves throughout fight week, last week Harris was sitting at -110 on the betting line. It was a -110 pick 'em on either side, but a lot of money's come in on Harris, and I do understand it. I do agree with that line movement. It's just now I think the line has gone to the point where it's not going to go too much further, so I think there's going to be a little money coming back in on Christian Aguilera the closer we get to fight night. I think Harris is going to enter the cage at around -135, -140, with Christian Aguilera at around +120, +125. Now, as for how this fight plays out, Carlston Harris is a really interesting fighter. He's a guy that's quite big for the division. He's aggressive. He'll come forwards. His striking has got power behind it. He's got a couple of brutal knockouts on his record, but he's not the most technical striker. However, that's not really where his game lies. He's definitely a fighter that likes the physical side of fighting. He likes to be close up with his opponent, chest to chest. He likes to clinch up with them. He likes to shoot takedowns, get on top, look for submissions, look for ground and pound. And it's weird because there's part of his game that reminds me a lot of Alain Patrick. Now, Carlston Harris is definitely a better striker than Patrick, and Patrick is more relentless with the wrestling, but they do have similarities in the game. But with Christian Aguilera, I think it's actually a really good debut fight for Carlston Harris, a really good test to see exactly where he's at, because Aguilera isn't beaten easily. We saw in the early stages of the Sean Brady fight, Aguilera was having moments, he was getting off on low kicks, he was landing punches, and it was only when Sean Brady really turned a corner, made the in-cage adjustments, shot the takedowns, got in top control and started winning the fight and eventually getting Aguilera out of there. It was only then that the fight really shifted. Before then, the fight was quite even and Aguilera was having moments himself on the feet. So it's the same thing with Harris here. I think that Harris has got to be careful of Aguilera with his power, with that right hand, because Aguilera can knock you out with that right hand, and Aguilera's got wrestling as well. well, so Harris has got to make sure that he's not shooting lazy takedowns. And although it's a possibility that Aguilera actually hits a takedown himself, I don't think it's going to be that easy. It's just from Harris's perspective, if he wants to take Aguilera down, I think he can do, and I think he can have success in doing so, and he can have success topside as well. He's got a really good top heavy game. It's just his takedowns have got to be set up correctly. The entries have got to be there. He's just not got to be lazy with it. But that's the thing with Carlston Harris. He'll pin you up against the cage and then he'll look to drag you down from there, opposed to just shooting a reactive double leg takedown in the middle of the cage. He can do that obviously, but like I said, he likes to really push his opponents back, pin them up against the cage. He's strong, he's physical. That's where he has his way with his opponents, and that's where he really does put in his best work, and he can do that for 5 rounds as well, a grueling 5 rounds, so cardio isn't an issue for Harris either. I think Aguilera could win this fight. He could land a knockout punch. He might even score a takedown himself. He could be absolutely underrated in this fight on the betting line as a plus 130 underdog. It's always interesting to see how a fighter adapts in the UFC debut, fighting UFC fighters, so it's going to be really interesting, but I've got a funny feeling that Harris isn't the type of guy that's going to get surprised or get stunned by the bright lights at the top of the sport in the UFC. I think he's a fighter that's going to go in there and just grind as he normally does. If all else fails, if his technique isn't there, if he's getting hit, just pin his opponent up against the cage, be physical, start grinding on him, get the fight down to the mat, and just get the win at any means necessary. I like Carlston Harris as a fighter. It's going to be really interesting to see how he performs, how he looks, and how he is moving forwards after that. I'm picking Carlston Harris to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and as always, fight fans, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to our MMA Play 365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAplay365.com. We had an amazing event last weekend across the board. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs, accumulators as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, which comes with a money back guarantee by the way, we have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, which also now includes our DFS packages for DraftKings and FanDuel advice too. All our subscriptions are at very affordable prices. Just hop onto MMAplay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.